had always believed in love. I was raised to believe that when you met the right person you knew that love was about trust, partnership, and an unbreakable connection. So when I met Adrian, I thought I had found exactly that. He was everything a woman could want. Charming, confident, attentive. From the moment we met, he made me feel like I was the center of his world. He was thoughtful in the way he spoke to me, always remembering the little things I said. He surprised me with gifts that weren't extravagant but were meaningful. He listened, he understood me in a way I had never experienced before. Or so I thought. Looking back, I realize how carefully constructed it all was. He never pushed too hard, never made it seem like he was interested in my wealth. Instead, he made me trust him. He would say things like, "I don't care about money. I just want a simple life with you." Or, "I hate how people always try to use you for your success." He was the perfect man, the kind who seemed so different from all the others who had tried to get close to me for the wrong reasons. And I fell for it. Hard. I let him in. We moved in together after a year and it felt like a dream. He was always affectionate, always making me laugh, always there when I needed him. My friends adored him. Even my family, who had always been wary of my relationships because of my fortune, welcomed him. No one saw the cracks in the illusion. Not even me. The first real red flag was subtle. He started asking small, casual questions about my finances. Nothing that seemed suspicious at the time. "Do you have a financial planner? I don't understand why you still work so hard when you already have so much. What's the point of having wealth if you don't use it to enjoy life?" It was always framed as curiosity, as concern for me. And I didn't think twice about it. Then the real manipulation began. He started planting ideas in my head. We should invest in something together. Maybe we should merge finances. It's just easier when you're building a future with someone. I hate that you stress about money so much. Let me help manage things for you. Slowly, he positioned himself closer to my wealth. He never asked for money directly. That would have been too obvious. Instead, he made me believe that sharing it with him was my idea. And I did. I trusted him. Until the night everything unraveled. I had been working late in my home office when I heard his phone vibrate on the kitchen counter. He had left it there while he was in the shower, something he normally never did. And then I saw the name flash on the screen. A message from someone named Nathan. "She bought it. I'll call you when the transfer is finalized." I froze. The transfer? But what? My stomach twisted as I stared at the screen, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Every instinct told me to put the phone down, to pretend I hadn't seen it. But something darker, something more primal in me needed to know the truth. I unlocked his phone. And what I found made my entire world crumble. Messages. Dozens of them. Bank account details. Discussions of investments I had never approved. Transactions set to be processed under my name, things I had never authorized. And then the final betrayal. A message from Adrian himself. "Once the money is transferred, I'm done. She'll never see it coming." I felt sick. I staggered back, my hands trembling, my breath coming too fast. This man, the man I had loved, the man I had trusted, had been playing me from the very beginning. He had never cared about me. He had been waiting for the right moment, for the perfect time to steal everything from me and walk away like I was nothing. I had been blind. I heard the shower turn off. Adrian was coming. For a brief moment I considered confronting him. Screaming at him, demanding answers, making him pay right then and there. But then something in me shifted. A different kind of fire burned in my chest. If I exposed him now, he would just deny it. He would spin some excuse, act like it was all a misunderstanding. But if I waited, if I played the role of the fool just a little longer, I could ruin him. I locked his phone and placed it back exactly where it had been. And when Adrian walked into the kitchen, smiling as he wrapped his arms around me, pressing a kiss to my forehead like nothing had changed, I smiled back. Because I was about to become his worst nightmare. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed next to Adrian, staring at the ceiling while his breathing remained steady, his body relaxed in the blissful ignorance of a man who thought he had won. My hands clenched into fists beneath the covers. This wasn't just betrayal. This was calculated destruction. He had spent months, years, making me trust him, weaving himself into my life so seamlessly that I had let him into every part of me. And all along he had been waiting for the moment to strike, to strip me of everything and walk away without a second thought. If I had been any other woman, maybe he would have succeeded. But Adrian had underestimated me. Because I wasn't just going to leave him. I was going to make him pay. I spent the next few days pretending everything was normal. It wasn't easy. Every time he kissed me, I wanted to push him away. Every time he smiled at me, I wanted to wipe that smug expression off his face. But I played my role perfectly. I cooked his favorite meals. I laughed at his jokes. I let him think I was still his. But behind closed doors, I was preparing for war. The first thing I did was call my lawyer. She had been handling my finances for years, and when I told her I suspected Adrian was trying to steal from me, she didn't hesitate. "We'll freeze any pending transfers immediately," she said. "But if you want to catch him in the act, we need more than just suspicion." I needed evidence. Real, undeniable proof that Adrian wasn't just a liar but a criminal. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I started investigating my own fiancé. The first thing I did was check the accounts. Adrian had been careful, he had hidden his tracks well. But he had made one fatal mistake. He had underestimated how much I paid attention. I knew my money. I knew my investments. And I knew that the transfers he had set up weren't mine. Late at night, when Adrian was asleep, I accessed the files on his laptop. At first they looked normal. Documents about stocks, a few personal emails. But then I found a hidden folder. Inside it I found everything. Emails with his so-called business partners, detailing exactly how he planned to drain my accounts. Drafts of exit strategies. Plans to leave me the moment he had what he needed. Lists of fake expenses he had created to justify the missing money. And then, the final dagger to the heart. A conversation with a woman named Sophie. Sophie, she really has no clue? Adrian, none. She thinks we're planning a future together. Poor thing. Sophie, you're so close. Just a little more time and we'll be free. Adrian, not long now. Once the last transfer goes through, I'll disappear. She'll never know what hit her. I gripped the edge of the desk so tightly my knuckles turned white. He had another woman. Of course he did. Adrian wasn't just after my money, he had never loved me. I had been nothing but a means to an end. And he thought he could just walk away? No. He was mine to destroy now. The next morning I smiled at him over breakfast like nothing had changed. "I was thinking," I said, stirring my coffee. "Maybe we should start making some real investments together. You've always been so smart about money. I trust you." His eyes gleamed with victory. He had no idea. I was playing the long game now. And by the time I was done, Adrian wouldn't just lose my fortune. He would lose everything. Adrian thought he had won. As the days passed, I watched him with a quiet, calculating gaze. He was confident now, sure that I was still his oblivious, devoted fiancé. I let him think that. I let him believe I trusted him enough to start merging finances, investing together and handing over access to my wealth. But behind that carefully crafted mask I was setting a trap. I had already frozen the pending transfers through my lawyer. Adrian didn't know that yet. He thought that any day now his fraudulent investments would go through, that my money would start slipping into accounts he had set up under his name. What he didn't realize was that I had already cut him off. But that wasn't enough. I didn't just want to stop him. I wanted to ruin him. Men like Adrian always had an Achilles heel. They were never as smart as they thought they were. His was Sophie. The woman he had been messaging late at night, the one who had helped him plan this. Through a bit of quiet digging I found out who she was. She wasn't just some girlfriend, she was his partner in crime. A woman he had dated years before meeting me, someone who had been with him when he was nothing. She had been part of his previous scams. Small ones, nothing as big as what he was trying to do to me. And that was his mistake. He had done this before. I hired a private investigator, someone discreet, someone experienced in uncovering financial fraud. Within a week I had a full report on Adrian's past. Fake businesses. Offshore accounts. Multiple identities. He wasn't just a liar. He was a criminal. Once I had the proof, I did what Adrian never expected. I started giving him exactly what he wanted. I was thinking, I told him one evening, curling up beside him on the couch, maybe it's time we stop waiting and just merge accounts. I mean, we're going to get married anyway, right? He tried to act surprised, but I saw the hunger in his eyes. He thought he had won. "I don't want you to feel pressured, babe," he said smoothly, tucking a strand of my hair behind my ear. "It's a big step." I smiled, playing my role perfectly. "I want this. I trust you." And just like that, Adrian started getting comfortable. He didn't question why I suddenly seemed more eager to hand over my finances. He didn't suspect why I was encouraging him to take control. He was too greedy, too sure of himself to see what was really happening. What he didn't know was that every move he made was being recorded. Every login attempt, every attempt to alter my financial records, it was all being tracked. He was stepping into a trap I had built specifically for him. A month later, everything was in place. I had the financial records, the fraudulent transactions, the offshore accounts he had tried to hide. I had proof of his entire operation. But I wasn't done. I needed one final blow. I reached out to Sophie. She didn't know who I was when I first messaged her. She thought I was just another woman Adrian had scammed, another victim. But when I sent her proof that he was also scamming her, that he had been secretly draining her accounts while planning his future with me, everything changed. She flipped instantly. Sophie wasn't loyal. She was angry. And that's when I knew I had him. Because the moment I had her on my side, she handed me everything. Every email. Every phone call. Every fake account Adrian had ever used. I had enough to bury him. And I wasn't going to do it quietly. Adrian had built his life on lies. He had played me, manipulated me, thought he had full control over my future. Now it was my turn. And I was about to make him wish he had never met me. Adrian still thought he was winning. Every day he smiled at me, kissed me, played the role of the perfect fiancé while secretly believing that soon he'd be walking away with everything I had worked for. He had no idea that every move he made was a step further into the trap I had set for him. I let him believe I was still completely in love, that I was blindly following his lead, trusting him with everything. I even pretended to be excited about our financial future together, asking him for investment advice, letting him guide me through plans he had already designed to benefit only himself. He believed he had me wrapped around his finger, and that was exactly what I needed. While he spent his days finalizing his scam, I spent mine tightening my hold around his future. The private investigator I had hired dug deeper, unearthing more than I had expected. Adrian wasn't just planning to steal from me, he had done this before. He had left a trail of women behind him, all of them with their bank accounts drained, their trust shattered. He was a professional con artist, a man who moved from one wealthy target to the next, charming his way into their lives before vanishing with everything they owned. But this time he had picked the wrong woman. I continued to gather proof. I had recorded phone calls, saved messages, copied financial documents he had unknowingly left open on his laptop. Every piece of evidence built a case so airtight he wouldn't be able to talk his way out of it. But I wasn't just going to expose him. I wanted him to feel the betrayal, the humiliation, the loss. So I played along, pretending to be the clueless, loving fiancé he thought I was. I made him believe that we were closer than ever, that I trusted him with my heart and my money. And as he got closer to the moment he thought he would succeed, I watched him let his guard down. He became cocky, careless. He started celebrating his victory before he even had it. One night, over dinner, I took his hand and looked into his eyes with a softness I didn't feel. "I don't know what I would do without you," I whispered, and I saw his smile widen. He thought he had won. He thought I was weak. But in reality I was already 3 steps ahead. The night before he planned to make the final transfers, I sent the documents to my lawyer. The next morning, Adrian would wake up to a very different reality. One where he wasn't in control anymore. But I wasn't just after legal justice. No, I wanted him to see his downfall, to understand that he had been played by the very person he thought he was manipulating. So I prepared something special. The night before his final betrayal, I suggested we celebrate. "We should go out tomorrow," I said, curling into him on the couch, pretending I felt safe in his arms. "Let's go somewhere special. Just you and me." He agreed, thinking he had already won. He thought the celebration was for his victory. He had no idea that by this time tomorrow he would have nothing. I smiled against his shoulder, hiding my satisfaction. Tomorrow Adrian would learn that he had never been the one in control. I was. And by the time I was done, he wouldn't just lose my fortune, he would lose everything. Adrian woke up the next morning with no idea that everything he had planned was about to collapse. He was still confident, still playing the role of the loving fiancé, still thinking that by the end of the day he would have access to my fortune and be on his way to a life of luxury without me. I watched him over breakfast, pretending to be the same devoted woman he thought he had fooled. He didn't notice the way my hands were too steady, the way my smile held a secret he couldn't see. He was too busy mentally counting my money, too focused on his carefully laid out plan to realize he was walking straight into my trap. "Tonight, let's celebrate," I told him, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. "Something fancy, just the two of us." He grinned, thinking I was making this easier for him. "Anything for you, babe," he said, giving me that charming smile that had once made me fall for him. I smiled back. He had no idea what was coming. By midday, the first cracks in his plan appeared. He had set up the final transfers, expecting my accounts to flow seamlessly into his, but instead he got an error message. Then another. He tried again. And again. By the time he called his financial contact, one of his partners in crime, he was panicking. I watched from across the room, pretending to be oblivious as he paced back and forth, gripping his phone tightly. "What do you mean it's blocked?" he snapped. Silence. Then his face paled. "What do you mean there's an investigation?" I took a sip of my tea, savoring the moment. By the time he hung up, he was trying to mask his fear, but I could see it. His whole body was tense, his eyes darting around as he tried to think of a way to salvage what was quickly slipping through his fingers. Then he turned to me. "Babe," he said, forcing a smile. "Something weird is happening with my bank. I need to check on something, just some technical stuff. Nothing to worry about." I tilted my head, feigning innocence. "Oh, do you need my help?" His jaw tightened. He was starting to realize something was off. No. "I'll handle it," he said quickly. "Just, I might need you to resend some of the transfers later, okay?" I let my face fall, pretending to be concerned. "Oh, I don't think that's possible." His entire expression froze. "What do you mean?" I set down my tea, locking eyes with him for the first time that day. "I mean, Adrian, that the accounts aren't in your name. They were never going to be. I made sure of that." His lips parted slightly, but no words came out. The confidence, the charm, the arrogance, it all vanished in an instant. What are you talking about?" he said, his voice quieter now. I stood up slowly, walking toward him, letting the truth sink in. "I know everything," I whispered. The color drained from his face. "Everything?" I smiled, leaning in just slightly. "Everything." The panic was instant. He grabbed his phone, trying to check something, but it was too late. I had already locked him out of everything. The accounts he thought were his. Frozen. The fake companies he had set up. Under investigation. His personal finances. His entire plan had collapsed in a single morning. I leaned against the table, watching as he tried, desperately, to piece it together. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "You set me up." I crossed my arms, arching an eyebrow. "You think I was just going to sit back and let you take everything from me?" His nostrils flared, his hands curling into fists. "I loved you." I laughed. Actually laughed. "No, Adrian," I said, shaking my head. "You loved my money. And now you don't have either." He was breathing hard now, realizing just how deep this went. He had no way out. And I wasn't done yet. I reached for my phone, dialing a number he didn't recognize. He watched in stunned silence as I waited, then spoke the words that sealed his fate. "You can come in now." The front door opened a second later. And two men in suits, lawyers accompanied by an official from the fraud division, stepped inside. Adrian went completely still. "Mr. Carter," one of the officials said, his tone clipped. "We need to have a conversation." He turned to me in horror. "Emma." I smiled sweetly. "Enjoy your new future, Adrian." And just like that, his entire world collapsed. Adrian was completely frozen. His entire world had just crumbled in a matter of seconds, and I watched as realization dawned on his face. The man who had once believed he was untouchable, the one who had played me so easily, was now scrambling for a way out. But there was no escape. The two officials stepped closer, their presence imposing. One of them, a well-dressed man with a briefcase, opened a folder and pulled out a stack of documents. Evidence of Adrian's fraudulent transactions, his fake accounts, the offshore holdings he thought were hidden. The very same ones he had planned to drain my fortune into. "Mr. Carter," the investigator said coolly, flipping through the documents, "we have reason to believe you have been engaging in financial fraud, identity manipulation, and attempted theft. You are now officially under investigation." Adrian swallowed hard, glancing at me as if hoping I would do something. As if the woman he had spent months deceiving, the woman he had planned to leave penniless, would save him. I just smiled. I don't know what this is, he stammered, putting on his best performance. There must be a mistake. I've never. The investigator didn't flinch. We have proof of fraudulent financial transfers under your name. We also have testimonies linking you to prior cases of financial exploitation. Your bank accounts are frozen, and your access to all pending transactions has been revoked. Adrian was breathing hard now, his hands clenched at his sides. He was losing control and he knew it. Then his real personality slipped through. You set me up, he snapped, his voice sharp and filled with rage. You played me. I tilted my head, pretending to consider his words. You mean the way you played me? His nostrils flared. You think you're so smart, don't you? I stepped closer, my voice calm, controlled. No, Adrian. I just paid attention. Something you never thought I was capable of. The officials didn't wait for him to process the humiliation. One of them pulled out a legal notice and handed it to him. You will be required to cooperate with this investigation. Should you attempt to flee or interfere in any way, further legal action will be taken against you. Adrian barely looked at the paper. His mind was already racing, calculating, trying to figure out his next move. But I wasn't done yet. Before you start thinking about how you can escape this, I said softly, stepping even closer, I should let you know that I wasn't the only one you scammed. For the first time, real fear flashed in his eyes. I smiled. Sophie told me everything. His entire body went rigid. You see, Adrian, I continued, you should have been more careful. When you betray multiple people at the same time, eventually one of them is bound to betray you. His breathing was erratic now, panic settling deep into his bones. She gave me everything, I whispered. Every transaction. Every deal. Every lie. I watched as he put the pieces together, his face contorting in fury. Sophie had turned on him. I had turned on him. The walls were closing in. You think you're going to get away with this? He growled. I leaned in just slightly, lowering my voice. I already have. His jaw clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might break. But there was nothing he could do. His fate was sealed. The officials gave him one last warning before leaving, reminding him that they would be in touch. I held the door open, watching as he stood there, his entire world crashing down around him. And then, finally, the moment I had been waiting for. The desperation. Emma, he breathed, his voice lower now, his anger replaced with something else. We can fix this. I blinked, almost amused. Fix this. I repeated. You tried to rob me, Adrian. You were planning to take everything I had and leave me with nothing. And now you think I'll help you? His face fell. I smiled. You really thought you were smarter than me, didn't you? Silence. For the first time, Adrian had nothing to say. I stepped back, crossing my arms. Get out. He hesitated, like he still thought there was a way out of this. Like if he just said the right thing, I would suddenly forget everything. But I wasn't the woman he had fooled before. Get out, I repeated, my voice calm but firm. And this time he listened. I watched as he walked out of my house, out of my life, his shoulders tense with the weight of everything he had lost. Adrian had come into my life believing he could take everything from me. But in the end, I had taken everything from him. Adrian was gone, but I wasn't finished yet. Exposing him to the fraud division was only part of my plan. It wasn't enough for him to simply lose access to my money, he had to lose everything. His reputation, his power, his carefully crafted image. He had spent years perfecting the role of the charming, successful businessman, the man who could walk into any room and have people eating out of the palm of his hand. I wanted to strip that from him, to make sure that when people heard his name, they didn't think of wealth or influence. They thought of humiliation. So I made sure his downfall was public. The morning after I kicked him out, I sent everything I had, every fraudulent transaction, every manipulated contract, every screenshot of his messages with Sophie, to the right people. The financial authorities had what they needed to pursue legal action, but I wanted to go further. I leaked the truth to his business associates, the ones who had once seen him as a respected professional. I made sure they knew that he had built his career on lies, that the money he flaunted wasn't his own, that he had manipulated his way into their circles. Then I reached out to the media. It didn't take long for the story to spread. Within hours, headlines popped up online. Rising business star exposed for financial fraud. Authorities launch investigation. Prominent entrepreneur caught in elaborate wealth scheme. Shocking details revealed. Woman outs ex-fiancé for attempted fortune theft. Exclusive interview inside. I wasn't interested in interviews. I let the documents speak for themselves. The world didn't need my words to condemn Adrian. The facts were enough. And as expected, the fallout was immediate. His business partners cut ties with him. Investors withdrew their support. His accounts, what little money he actually had left, were frozen pending investigation. The same people who had once praised him, who had believed in his charm and wit, now saw him for what he really was. A fraud. A scammer. A failure. And then, the cherry on top, Sophie turned on him completely. She had initially wanted revenge when she found out he had been scamming her as well, but I made sure she had every reason to destroy him. I gave her the full extent of his financial lies, the proof that he had used her as nothing more than a tool. And she used it to ensure that every legal door closed around him. Adrian was officially ruined. And when he finally reached out to me, one last desperate attempt to save himself, I let him talk. Emma, please, he begged over the phone, his voice raw, broken. You don't have to do this. I get it, okay? I hurt you. I was stupid. But you're better than this. I smiled, twirling my wine glass in my hand as I sat in my penthouse, untouched by the chaos he had created for himself. No, Adrian, I said calmly. I'm exactly the woman you made me into. Silence. Then a shaky breath. I lost everything. I leaned back against my couch, staring out at the city skyline, feeling nothing but satisfaction. I know, I said. And that's the best part. I ended the call. Adrian had spent years pretending to be someone he wasn't. He had convinced himself he could manipulate his way into wealth, that he could take from others and walk away untouched. But he had played the wrong game with the wrong woman. And now he had nothing left. On the other hand, I was just getting started. Adrian was drowning and I was already 3 steps ahead. He had lost everything, his career, his connections, his stolen finances. The world that once admired him now saw him for what he truly was. And yet, even as his downfall unfolded in real time, he still tried to fight back. I expected nothing less. Men like Adrian don't accept defeat easily. They claw, they manipulate, they scramble for any scrap of power they can hold on to. But the difference now was that he had nothing left to bargain with. He tried calling mutual friends, people who had once believed in his success. But they wanted nothing to do with him. No one wants to be associated with a sinking ship. He reached out to investors, the ones he had charmed into funding his fake empire. But their lawyers had already advised them to cut all ties. Even Sophie, the woman who had once planned a future with him, had turned him into the authorities faster than he could react. With every door closing, he turned back to me. First it was the emails. Emma, let's talk. Just you and me. We don't have to let it end like this. I get it, okay? You wanted revenge. You won. But I need to fix this. I just need time. You're not as cold as you're pretending to be. I know you, Emma. You still love me. That one made me laugh. Then when I didn't respond, he tried guilt. Everything is gone. My career. My future. I can't even walk outside without people recognizing me from those damn articles. Is this really what you wanted? Yes, Adrian. It absolutely was. But the real desperation came when he showed up in person. I had expected it. When a man like Adrian loses control, his last instinct is always to confront the one who took it from him. I was at my favorite cafe when it happened, enjoying a quiet afternoon, a life free from his presence, when I felt him before I even saw him. The tense, charged energy of someone with nothing to lose. I sighed, setting down my cup just as he slid into the seat across from me. He looked terrible. The charming, well-groomed businessman I once knew was gone. His shirt was wrinkled, his stubble unkempt, his eyes hollow with exhaustion. But it wasn't regret in his expression. It was anger. You've made your point, he said, his voice rough. I raised an eyebrow. Have I? His jaw tightened. You don't have to keep this going. You won. I leaned back, crossing my arms. Did I? Because you're still sitting in front of me, Adrian. Which means you still think you have something left. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his disheveled hair. I need to fix this. You don't understand what it's like to lose everything overnight. I tilted my head. Actually, I do. Because that was your plan for me. Silence. Then, softer, more desperate, I never wanted to hurt you. I laughed, shaking my head. You didn't want to hurt me? You spent years planning to take everything from me. You made me trust you, love you, believe that you were my future, all while knowing you were going to leave me with nothing. his hands clenched on the table. I thought, "No, Adrian." He didn't think. "That's the problem." I leaned in, my voice cold. "You saw me as just another stupid woman you could play. You thought I wouldn't notice, that I'd be too blinded by love to see you for what you really are." His breathing was uneven now. "Emma, please." I stared at him for a long moment. Then finally I stood. "You thought you were playing me," I said quietly. "But all this time, you were just setting yourself up for the greatest failure of your life." I picked up my bag, slung it over my shoulder. And then I walked away. I didn't look back. Because Adrian was already finished. Adrian's downfall was complete. His reputation was in shambles, his finances were frozen, and every door he had once used to climb his way into wealth and power had been slammed shut in his face. I had made sure of that. Every business partner, every investor, every acquaintance who had once shaken his hand with admiration now saw him for what he truly was. A con artist, a fraud, a man who had built his life on deception. And now, stripped of his carefully crafted persona, Adrian had nothing left. But I was done watching him spiral. The moment I walked away from that final meeting at the cafe, I knew there was no more satisfaction to be had in his suffering. I had already won. There was nothing left for me in his destruction. The only thing I needed to focus on now was me. My future. My happiness. For the first time in a long time I felt free. And so, I started rebuilding. Not because I had lost anything, but because, for years I had let myself be defined by a relationship that was built on lies. It was time to rediscover the parts of myself that I had buried under Adrian's influence. The first step was cutting everything that reminded me of him. I moved out of the apartment we had shared. My apartment, the one he had so arrogantly tried to claim as his own. But I didn't want to live in a space that still held echoes of his presence. The memories of the nights we had spent together, the whispered promises he had made, all of it had been tainted by the truth of his betrayal. So I left. I found a new place. A beautiful penthouse overlooking the city, one that was entirely mine. No shared history. No ghost of a man who never really existed in the way I once believed. Then I changed my number. Adrian had already tried calling me so many times, from different phones, different accounts, desperate for some kind of opening. But I refused to let him into my world again. He had already taken up too much space in my life. That was over now. I spent the next few weeks indulging in myself for the first time in years. I traveled. I booked a last-minute trip to Italy, something I had always wanted to do but had put off because Adrian had convinced me that I needed to be practical with my money. That had been his first mistake, thinking he had a say in how I lived my life. Now, as I walked through the streets of Florence, drank wine by the Amalfi Coast, and rediscovered the joy of simply being, I realized how much of myself I had sacrificed for a man who had never deserved me. I reconnected with friends I had lost touch with. Adrian had subtly isolated me over the years, always making sure he was my main source of support. But now, as I sat around a table with the people who had always truly cared about me, laughing over inside jokes and reminiscing about the years before him, I realized just how much I had missed. And more than anything, I returned to the passions I had neglected. For years I had put my personal dreams on hold. My career, my creative pursuits, my ambitions, they had all taken a backseat because Adrian had made me believe that our future was more important. That his plans mattered more. Not anymore. I threw myself into work, reclaiming the projects I had once loved, landing new deals and making a name for myself, one that wasn't tied to him in any way. I started writing again, something I hadn't done since before Adrian had entered my life. I filled pages with thoughts, reflections, ideas for the future. It was cathartic. It was mine. And then one evening as I sat on my balcony watching the city lights, a thought hit me. I wasn't just healing. I was thriving. Adrian had thought he was going to break me. That by taking my money he would take me along with it. But I was still standing, still building, still moving forward in a way he never could. He had spent his entire life taking from others, believing that money and power were what made a person successful. But real success. It wasn't about wealth. It wasn't about having control over others. It was about freedom. And I had never been freer than I was in that moment. I didn't check on Adrian after that. I didn't need to. His story was over. Mine was just beginning. Adrian had taken so much from me, more than just money or trust. He had stolen years of my life, time I would never get back. He had stolen my confidence, my ability to believe in my own instincts. He had taken my kindness and turned it into a weapon against me, making me believe that love meant sacrifice, that trust meant ignoring my gut feelings. And the worst part? I had let him. That realization didn't come immediately. It wasn't some grand epiphany, some sudden awakening that made me feel lighter overnight. It came in waves. It came in quiet moments, in the spaces between moving forward and reflecting on the past. It came in the silence of my new apartment, where I no longer had to second-guess my own thoughts, where I no longer had to consider him in every decision I made. At first I told myself I was fine. That I had won. That Adrian was the only one who had lost something in this. But the truth was I had lost something too. Not just the time I had wasted on him, but pieces of myself I hadn't even realized I had let go of. Who was I before him? What did I love before he entered my life? What did I want that wasn't shaped by his influence? I had spent so much time being his version of me that I had forgotten who I actually was. And that was the hardest part to face. It wasn't just about the betrayal. It wasn't just about the fraud, the lies, the manipulation. It was about me. About the person I had become while I was with him. About the things I had ignored, the warnings I had brushed aside because I wanted to believe in him. I had mistaken control for security. I had mistaken manipulation for love. And I had mistaken my own self-sacrifice for commitment. Now that I was on the other side, I could see it clearly. Adrian had been my lesson. A painful, expensive, emotionally devastating lesson. But one I needed. Because the truth was, he wasn't the first person in my life who had tried to take advantage of me. Maybe not in such a blatant criminal way, but in smaller ways. Friends who had used my generosity without giving anything in return. Colleagues who had taken credit for my work. Family members who had expected me to always be the strong one, the provider, the one who never said no. It was a pattern that I had allowed. I had convinced myself that my worth was tied to what I could give to others. That if I was kind enough, patient enough, loving enough, people would see my value and appreciate me for who I was. But people like Adrian, they don't see kindness as something to cherish. They see it as something to exploit. And I was done letting that happen. For the first time in my life, I started setting boundaries. At first, it felt uncomfortable. Saying no, walking away from things that didn't serve me, prioritizing myself. It felt selfish. I had spent so long believing that I had to earn love, that I had to prove my worth, that doing things for myself felt unnatural. But little by little it got easier. I stopped apologizing for taking up space. I stopped explaining myself to people who didn't deserve an explanation. I stopped shrinking. And in the process I found something I hadn't realized I had lost. Joy. Not just the fleeting kind that comes from distractions or temporary pleasures, but real, deep joy. The kind that settles in your bones, that makes you feel safe in your own skin again. I started waking up excited for my days, not just existing but living. I traveled, but not to escape, to explore. To see the world for myself, not for someone else. I took a trip to Italy. Something I had always wanted to do but had put off because Adrian had convinced me that I needed to be practical with my money. That had been his first mistake, thinking he had a say in how I lived my life. I reconnected with old friends, the ones Adrian had subtly distanced me from. I rebuilt the relationships that mattered, strengthening the bonds that had never been about what I could give, but about who I was. I found new hobbies. I started painting again, something I hadn't done since college. I wrote. I filled notebooks with my thoughts, my reflections, my plans for the future. Not because I had to, not because I was working towards some goal, just because I wanted to. And most importantly, I trusted myself again. Because the biggest betrayal hadn't been Adrian's. It had been mine. Betraying my own instincts, my own needs, for the sake of someone who never deserved me in the first place. Ignoring the warning signs. Making myself smaller to fit into his world instead of realizing that his world was never big enough for me to begin with. That was over now. Adrian was gone. And for the first time in my life I felt truly, completely free. After Adrian, I wasn't looking for love. I wasn't interested in romance, in trust, in giving my heart to another person who could so easily destroy it. Love had become something tainted in my mind. Something used, manipulated, turned into a tool for control. It wasn't beautiful. It wasn't real. It was just a game people played when they wanted something. Or at least that's what I told myself. 4 months after Adrian's downfall, I focused on myself. I traveled, I worked, I built a life that was entirely my own. And for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for validation from someone else. I didn't need approval. I didn't need a partner. I was enough on my own. But life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. I met Ryan in the most ordinary way, standing in line at a bookstore cafe waiting for my usual cappuccino. It had been raining that day, the kind of soft, steady drizzle that made the city feel quieter, slower. I had been flipping through a novel while waiting for my drink when a voice beside me spoke. "That's a great book." I turned, expecting some cliché pickup line, another charming stranger who thought a single sentence could earn him my time. But when I looked up, the man beside me wasn't trying to impress me. He was just smiling, casual but genuine, as if he had only spoken because he truly meant it. His name was Ryan. He had dark, tousled hair, warm brown eyes, and a quiet confidence that didn't demand attention but held it. There was something different about him, something calm, something steady. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't performing. He wasn't trying to convince me of anything. He was just there. And I liked that. We talked for a few minutes while we waited for our drinks. It was easy. No forced charm, no lingering questions about what I did or how much I made. Just a natural conversation about books, about the rain, about how we both secretly loved the city more when it was quiet like this. When our drinks were ready, I expected that to be the end of it. But then as I turned to leave, he hesitated. "Would you want to sit for a bit?" he asked, almost as if he wasn't sure if he should. As if he was leaving the choice entirely up to me. And that was new. With Adrian, everything had always been his decision. His idea. His plan. I had always been the one following, adjusting, compromising. But Ryan? He was asking. And for some reason I said yes. It started as a simple coffee. A conversation that didn't feel like an obligation, that didn't carry the weight of expectation. And when it was over, he didn't push for my number, didn't try to convince me to see him again. He just smiled and said, "It was nice talking to you." And then he walked away. That should have been the end of it. But a week later I ran into him again. This time at an art gallery downtown where I had gone on a whim to clear my head. I was standing in front of a painting when I heard a familiar voice. "I didn't take you for an art person." I turned surprised. There he was again, Ryan, dressed casually, holding a glass of wine like he had been perfectly at home here. "I didn't take you for one either," I admitted. He laughed. "Maybe we're both full of surprises." Maybe we were. That night we ended up walking together, talking for hours. It wasn't flirting, it wasn't a game, it was just easy. Ryan never asked me about my past. He never pushed. He never acted like he was entitled to my time or my attention. He just listened. And for the first time in a long time I wanted to talk. Not about Adrian. Not about revenge or betrayal or all the things that had once consumed me. But about myself. My dreams. The things I had never been allowed to focus on before. He made me feel seen in a way I hadn't even realized I had been missing. And that terrified me. Because what if he was just another mistake waiting to happen? What if he was just another Adrian wearing a different mask? What if, the moment I let my guard down, it all happened again? I almost ran. I almost convinced myself to walk away, to shut myself off, to disappear before I could get hurt again. But then one night, after another long conversation over coffee, he asked me something that stopped me in my tracks. "You don't talk about your past much." I stiffened. "No, I don't." He nodded, accepting my answer without pressing. But then he said, "You don't have to tell me. But just so you know, whatever happened, it doesn't define you." I stared at him. Because for so long I had been defined by my past. By Adrian. By the betrayal. By the revenge. By the fight. But what if that wasn't my whole story? What if I got to decide who I was now? So I took a deep breath. And for the first time I told him everything. Not because I needed to explain myself. Not because I needed him to understand. But because for the first time I wanted to let someone in. And Ryan just listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't pity me. He didn't act like he had all the answers. When I finished, he just said, "I'm glad you got out." That was it. No questions. No judgments. Just an acknowledgement that what I had survived mattered, but that it wasn't all I was. And in that moment I realized something. Ryan wasn't like Adrian. He wasn't pretending. He wasn't trying to win me over. He wasn't looking at me like I was something to possess. He was just there, steady and real, asking for nothing but honesty. And maybe, just maybe, I was finally ready to believe that love could be something more than what I had known before. Maybe love wasn't about proving yourself. Maybe it wasn't about losing yourself to someone else. Maybe love, real love, was simply about being seen. And for the first time I wasn't afraid to be seen. I had imagined closure so many times. I had thought about what it would feel like to see Adrian suffer, to watch as everything he had built on lies crumbled beneath him. And for a while that was enough. His downfall had been swift and absolute. He had gone from a man who walked into rooms with confidence, who made people believe in his charm, to a nobody. His name was no longer associated with power or success. It was tied to scandal, to fraud, to failure. But the truth was, I had stopped thinking about Adrian long before his final collapse. Because while he had spent his days scrambling to salvage the wreckage of his life, I had been thriving. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It wasn't about making sure he paid for what he had done. That part had already been taken care of. What mattered now was me. My life. My peace. I had built something better than what I had with him. Oh, not better. And that was the difference. Adrian had never really had me. He had the version of me he had manipulated into loving him, the woman he had convinced to trust him blindly. But the woman I was now? He wouldn't even recognize her. I was stronger, wiser, untouchable. And that was what made it so satisfying when, after everything, after months of silence, after losing everything, Adrian reached out to me one last time. It was a simple message. I'm sorry. 2 words. No explanation, no desperate plea for another chance. Just that. I stared at the message for a long time, sipping my morning coffee, watching the city wake up from the balcony of my penthouse. The place that was mine. The life that was mine. And I felt nothing. No anger. No satisfaction. Just nothing. Because Adrian no longer had power over me. He wasn't part of my story anymore. And that was the greatest victory of all. I didn't respond. I simply deleted the message and blocked the number. Then I picked up my phone, smiling as I saw a text from Ryan, asking if I wanted to meet for breakfast. As I thought. Because that was what mattered now. Not the past. Not the man who had tried to steal my future. But the life I was actually living. And I had never felt more alive.